We're in November 2022. Here we go. Agricola, continuing. Ac primo congressu. So we've got a ablative at the start. So primo congressu at the first clash or the first congregation when they came together. E minus is an adverb. At long distance, curtabatur. This is the verb. So in the first clash, the first coming together in the battle, it was curtabatur, fought at long distance, E minus. Simique, at the same time, constantia, so that's steadfast and determination. Simul again, at the same time, arte, looks like with skill or with the art. The Britons, here we go, they look nominative plural. Ingentibus gladibus, these are with huge swords or long swords, and brevibus catris, and with these in the ablative, these are short shields. Missilia nostrum vitare. So this is what the Britons are doing. They are vitaring, they are avoiding missalia nostrum, our missiles, the things that they're flinging through the air. Or vel excutere, literally means the shaking them off. So probably driving them away with their shields. Atqui and ipsi themselves, these are the Britannies, ipsi themselves. Magnum vim, great force, telorum of missiles or spears. Superfunderating, basically means literally they're overflowing, so they're flying everywhere. Donec, until something's happening. Agricola, he's now the nominative. Quator batavorum cohortes, so Agricola, 4 cohorts of batavorum, so the Batavi, and tangrorum, another genitive, duas cohortes est. So there's 4 cohorts of Batavi and 2 cohorts of Tungri. Something's happening to them by Agricola, our nominative. Ut, that, rem, the matter or the circumstances, ad mucrones ac menes adducerant. This is plural here, adducerant. So it's looking like these 4 cohorts and these 2 cohorts are adducerating. They're being led to mulcrones, which is the edge of a sword, and menace and hand-to-hand combat. Quod et, probably because also ipsis, with these or to them or something, it's dative or ablative plural. Vetustate militae exercitatum, that's the genitive. So with this itself, maybe to them. Vetustes is old, exercitatum means a discipline or something they've practiced, milites of the soldiery. Yeah, it looks like this itself was a old practice of the military in using the edge of the swords in the hands. These are a group of people, cohorts which are with Agricola, and in habili to the hostibus. So they're not used to it. This is an adjective. In habili is. It's one of the third declensions. And so this is something that the enemy was difficult for them. Parva scuta, with small shields, it looks like, and enormous gladios. We can just use enormous in English. Enormous swords, remember they were long. Gerentibus, this is the present participle. So gerenting just means they were bearing them or carrying them. So this was difficult for the enemy who were carrying small shields and large swords. We'll have a daily dictionary nice and early. Inhabilis, inhabilis, inhabili. Inhabili takes the neuter. Difficult to handle and awkward. So they were not fitted for it, as it says. Nam Briton aurum gladi. For the gladi, the swords, genitive of the Britons. Sine mulcrum. This is sine taking the ablative, were without their pointed edge, the mulcrone. Complexum armorum et in arto pugnem non tolerabant, which is imperfect. So they could not tolerate, could not bear these complexes of arms, which are the lines of the arm men joined together, and fighting in this art, basically pugnem in arto. So they couldn't bear this type of complex fighting. Remember, their short shields and enormous swords were not fit for these sort of occasions. Igitur, therefore, ut Batavi, probably as the Batavians, miscere ictus, basically literally means that the blows began to mix. So they entered battle. Feriri umbonibus. Feriri is to strike. We're taking the infinitive here. Umbonibus is a little elbow in the middle of your shield. It's called a boss, I think they call it. So they were striking with this. It's in the ablative. Striking with the bosses of the shields. Aura fodere. They were digging at the auras, which are faces and mouths, probably the face of the opponents. And stratus, qui in equo ad stiderat, which means and those qui who was ad stiderat, standing in equo on the flatland, on the level ground. Stratus, they were strewn about, being cut down. Erigere, to erect basically, in collis aciem. So they begin to raise their aciem, their battle lines up the hill in collis. Coopere, this is why there's infinitive. So they were beginning to march up the hill, take their columns up the hill. Catere cohorts, the rest of the cohorts, emulatione, with the E there, so it's ablative, in emulation. Sometimes it means rivalry, but it could just mean to emulate these other people who are starting to go up the hill. Et, probably also means also. Conise, this is from a deponent, it's the past passive. Probably should have a sunt or something there, or a sint. And they're having struggled in their impetus, in their attacks. Cadere quosque proximus. So the rest of the cohorts are in emulation, and they're making an attack, an impetu, and they're striving. Cadere, cutting down, quosque, those who are proximus. So the enemy which were nearest to them. Ac plerique, which literally means and most of them or many of them. Semi-neces, literally again, means half dead. Neces is dead, semi means half. Aut integri, which means they're whole, they were not wounded at all. Festinatione victoriae relinquebantur. So most of them, in their haste, festination, they relinquished, they left behind semi-dead or whole. So in the haste for victory, festination victoriae, that looks like it's a genitive. So in the haste of victory, they left behind many who were semi-dead or whole. Interim, meanwhile, adverb. Equitum terme, this is squadrons of knights or cavalry, ut in brackets, as conivare, fugere. Conivere we saw yesterday were those people in the war chariots. Charioteers had fugarade, they had fled. So peditum se prolio miscere. So squadrons of the cavalry had miscarade, miscaveranted. They had mixed in, say, themselves in prolio, in the battle, in the foot soldiers' battle. It looks like so they'd mixed in, say, themselves with the peditum, with the foot soldiers, the infantry. Et quam, and although resentem terrorum intolerant, plural they'd brought in this verb, and so although they had brought in, intoleranted, a recent terror, in the accusative, densis tarmen's nevertheless, a densis hostium ag minus, with the dense columns, ag minus, hostium of enemy, and in equibalus locus, heribant. So this is the unequalness of the ground. So nevertheless, with the dense columns of the enemy, and they were sticking, heribanting in the unequal ground. And this happened, there'd been a recent terror that they'd brought in, but then fighting against them was the columns which were packed together dense, and the ground was uneven. Minimaique and leastly or minimally. Now, we've got a difference in the text. I'll just change this to the lobe. It has equestris. Okay, and so, where was I? Leastly, now, yam, facies erat, there was this appearance, pugne, of battle, of our cavalry action. So, equestris nostris. So, leastly now it had the appearance of our cavalry having a fight. Cum agri, with difficulty. Clevo means in or on a sloping hill. Instantes. Okay, so looks like now our people were standing or holding their ground with difficulty on this hill. Simul, and again at the same time, equorum corporibus impellorenter. They were being impelled or pushed by the corporibus. This is the body masses equorum of the horses. So that's why it doesn't look much now like the appearance of an equestrian battle, because the weight of the horses' bodies, the corporibuses, their bodies are forcing them forwards, it looks like. Ac sapi. And sapi is often. So in often, currus vagi, where you get vagrant chariots or wandering chariots. Exterrati sine rectibus equi. So the apposition is the exterrified equi. So the terrified horses without rectoribus. These are without the people who steer them. So these chariots are vagranting about, wandering about, and the horses were terrified because there wasn't anyone controlling them. Ut quemque formidio tolerant. They were tolerating. So quemque, each one was tolerating, bearing some sort of formidio, which is a dread. And transversus or obvious incursobanding. So they were running in. Traverse means going across the battlefield sideways, or obvious means going out to meet people. So they're either running across them or running into people, basically. Chapter 37. Et Britannia, in the Britons, qui ad hoc pugnae expertes, who were still ad hoc expertes. It's from the third declension here, so we know that it means they had nothing to do with the pugnae, with the battle. Not to be confused with the first and second, which expertus means you're experienced in. So the Britons, who had nothing to do with the battle ad hoc still, they were in sederanting at the summa collium. Collis is here taking that I stem I in its genitive plural. They were sitting at the summa, the top of the hill. And porcitatem nostrorum vaque spernabanting. And they were spurning or the paucity of our men, paucitatum of our men in their vacant time, basically the paucity of the spacing of the time. So they were despairing our nostrorum, our men, basically, in their spare time. Politim, it's a adverb in the TIM family. Little by little, gradually, they degredo. D means coming down. So they were stepping down from the hill, and circumire, to going around, terga vicentium cooperant. So cooperant means they were beginning to circle, which is why there's an infinitive, our backs of the vincentium, of the conquering side, which was the Romans. So basically, gradually, these people, the Britons, were coming down, who had been sitting on top of the hill, and they tried to surround our backs, basically, of us when we were winning Vincentium. Ni, it's basically nisi, it means unless or except. It himself, Veritas Agricola. Agricola Veritas, so he was fearing. And so it's ipsum itself, Veritas Agricola, quator equitalum alus. So these are four wings of the cavalry. So Agricola was fearing, and he did something with four wings of cavalry. Ad sabata belli retentas. So he was retaining them, retentus, for a sudden war, or a sudden burst of an attack in the war. Opposivited venientibus. Those who were venientibusing, these are present participle, those who were coming, he opposed them with these four wings of cavalry, which he had held back for a sudden emergency in the war. Quanto qui ferocius ad currerant. This is a long sentence. Tanto acrius pulsos in fugam disjecesset, which looks subjunctive. Now that last bit. And quanto was how much ferocious, how much ferocity they had currented, they had been running with such acrius, so much with a bitterness or fierceness, they were pulsos. They were repelled in fugam into flight, disjecesset, which was the pluperfect version. So he retained these four wings for this sudden attacks in war, opposing those who were coming, and with as much of ferocity, ferocious, as they were running with such fierceness, he disjected, he threw them and repelled them into flight. Okay. Ita, thus or so, the Concilium Britannorum, the plan of the Britons, in ipsos versum. Versum, it was turned on itself, that turned in against itself, accusative plural. Transvectaeque praecepto ducus, so the precepts are instructions, ducus is of the leader. A fronte, from the front, pugnantium of the fighting. Transvecte mean they were carried through from the front, a fronte of the fighting, the alle adverse hostium aciem invasere. So this wing transvected that went through from the front of the fighting to the invasere, just means to attack. Aversam, this is probably from the rear of the enemy, the aversam aciem. So the behind battle line of the enemy. So basically it means these cavalry people, they went through by the instructions of their leader from the front of the fighting. They took this wing through and attacked the enemy from the rear. Tum, then, viro, but. So, but then, patentibus locus, with the opening up of the land, where there's open spaces, a grande and atrox spectaculum. So, this E would probably be, because speculatum looks neuter, I could be wrong here. But it looks like a grand and atrocious spectacle. So I think the lobe has gory for atrox, but you can get what happened. So when there was open spaces, there was this huge, grand, fierce spectacle. Sequi means to follow. Vulnerare, there was wounding. Capere, there was capturing. And eostem oblatus alias. And alias means other people who are brought up to them. Eostem, these same people are trucidare, they cut them down. So this is what this atrox speculatum is. There's a lot of cutting down and wounding, etc. Yam, and now already, hostium, the enemy, of the enemy. Prout, it usually just means just as. Quisque, to each, to a person in a dative. Okay, ingenium. So, of the enemy, just as it was the ingenium to each one, which is his character of the enemy. Catervae armatura, a caterva is like a large group of armed men. Praestare, they're being pressed, turga, from the back by a porcorioribus, which is by a fewer amount. So the people chasing them are actually fewer in number, it looks like. Quidam, inerm, so certain unarmed people, ultro, of their own accord, rurade, they rushed, and se morte offere, and they offered, say themselves, morte, to death. And so they basically offered to die. Passim, everywhere, adverb, arma et corpora, so arms and bodies, and lacereatus, lacerated limbs, I guess they were hacked off, et cruenta humus. Cruenta is blood-stained, humus is the ground, and we're just about done. Et aliquando, and sometimes, etiam even, victis, the defeated, ira virtusque. Looks like to the defeated there is anger and valor. Nam, for, postquem, after, silvus ad pro prinqua verunt, that's plural, taking the dative to the woods. For after they had approached, dative to the woods, the silvus, primos sequentium in cortos. So the primos in cortos, the first were uncautious, sequentium, of the followers. So the first group of them who were following, or the closest, were uncautious. Collecti and locori gnarai circumvenibet. So narai means knowing, it comes from naris. So they knew of the place, the locorum, and collecti, and they circumvenibated. So the first of them were uncautious following him, and they were circumvenia. They were surrounded by those who knew the place and collected them together. Collegi means to having been gathered together. So anyway, quodni, but unless, frequens ubique Agricola, but unless Agricola, everywhere, frequent. He was often everywhere, it looked like, so, but it seemed like Agricola was everywhere. The validas and expedas, the validas is the strong accusative plural, and the expeditus means they're unencumbered, their feet are not entwined in things, literally. So the strong and unencumbered of the cohorts, indagnus modo et, in this way, indagnus means tracking them. So the unencumbered and strong cohorts, they were trackers. Cohort is indagnus. And sicubi arterio errant, and where there was a place that was arterial, means narrower, so the trees are bunched up, and so there's a narrow space. Partem, part, equitum, of the cavalry, dismissus equus. They sent away the horses. They got off their horses. Same time, rariores silvas, where the woodlands were more rarer, so where the trees are rarer, so I guess there's more open space. Ucesset, he had ordered the equitum, the horses, per soltre, to literally to jump through. So part of them were on foot, where it was very narrow, and where it was more wider, horses could jump through. Acceptum aliquid vulnus per nimium fu diciem foret, where he would accept some wounds through relying too much confidence, fiducious confidence. So this is what he did. He was everywhere. He sent the strong and unencumbered to track them down. He didn't want them to accept some wound, basically, by having too much confidence. So some of them were off their horses, and some of them were on their horses.